Hello, everybody. I think we're right on time here, fashionably late here. My guest today, let me introduce Dan Sunners. He's a VP at Conrad Direct, but he is also a content producer and he hosts his own podcast. I think last I checked, it was about 70 episodes, which is quite a 10-year. Podcast is called Dynamic Nonprofits with Dan. So we'll talk about that. We got to know each other primarily in digital space, and I've been following his content, and I think he's been following my content and has been kind enough to say that he enjoys it. Thank you for that, Dan. So he's my guest today. So Dan, please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Olga. It's an honor to be here. I mean that. I really appreciate this new project of yours and what you're trying to do. And I have been a longtime follower of your content and appreciate your thought leadership in the space. So I've been in the nonprofit sector for 15 years, all of which have been at Conrad Direct, which is one of the largest independent list brokerage firms in the industry. I started really not knowing that the industry existed, like so many of us. Started processing orders, doing spreadsheets, things like that. I've worked my way up through the business, and over the last few years have really developed a passion for creating content to try to engage with other nonprofit thought leaders and trying to start some conversations about how direct mail and digital fundraising in different areas of nonprofits can work better together, and how that's all mutually beneficial. And a big part of that is the LinkedIn content, which you and I have been engaging in for quite a while, and the Dynamic Nonprofits podcast, which I really appreciate you mentioning. And that's kind of the 2-minute overview. I live in New Jersey with my wife, Jessica, and our new puppy, Kona, who's 4 months old and is unfortunately at puppy training today. So not able to make an appearance on camera, but maybe next time I'm here.
Well, if you hear my dog barking, it's because he never had educational opportunities to behave well. So that could happen. This is a topic that Jeremy Rice and I talked about, and I want to ask you as well. I'm always impressed with people who have a day job, but then they spend all this time and effort. They produce podcasts or write books, or they have blogs, or that sort of thing. So how did you get started in content creation? Because I assume it's not part of your day job. Like, you still have a day job to do.
Yeah, most of the stuff that I do is part of my personal outreach to the industry, so completely separate from my 9-to-5 job. And it's funny because a lot of colleagues will ask me where I find the time, and I don't think that it doesn't feel like I really invest an undue amount of time into it. And then I look at other people like Jeremy who are writing books and creating cartoon series. I love Jeremy Rice. He's one of the great thinkers in the nonprofit sector. And I wonder where they find the time. But I think the key is that it can't be work. If you have a passion for this business, if you have ideas that you're not hearing talked about and you think you can start discussions and you have an audience, if it doesn't feel like work, you can find time to do that while still maintaining your work-life balance. I do interviews on my lunch breaks. I'll do a little bit after work, or sometimes on the weekends if I have some time, but it's not at all disruptive to my life. And I think one of the benefits in my case is that I have done it from a personal brand standpoint. So I really truly don't have another motive other than to kind of get ideas out there and start conversations and advance some concepts, which I've been passionate about for a long time. There is no sales process or anything that I'm trying to sell you at all. So the advantage of that is that I hope that the content has come across as being genuinely authentic. And of course, the other side to building a personal brand is you don't have the pressures that come along with trying to build a commercial brand. So you really can kind of do it around when you have time and when you have something to say. People ask, well, what's the ideal amount of times or the amount of times a week that you'll do a podcast or write content? And I tell them, it's when you think you have something to say. I keep a journal of ideas when they come to me, and I come back to them later on. And I just try to fit it into my schedule when I have time. But I really think it's because I do have a passion for this business. So the things that I'm talking about, the projects that I'm doing, I don't consider it to be work. So whatever extra time it's taking, it really isn't an added burden. And that's why I think I try to encourage more nonprofit, more passionate nonprofit professionals to get into this, because I know there is so much passion out there behind the industry. And when you do feel strongly about what you do, it doesn't feel work. It just, you need to have the courage to take that first step and enter yourself into the conversation.
No, I love that, because so many, so many of us who are in consulting or agency world, that sort of goes along with the territory, but you don't hear as many nonprofit voices. And partially because, there's sort of this perception, well, can I really do this, or can I not really do this? And it would certainly enrich the conversation. So the first step, what was your gateway content creation?
Well, I appreciate you asking. I'm happy to kind of retell that journey for you. It wasn't something that started overnight. And the other thing that I tell content creators and aspiring content creators is that I wish that I had started it a long time ago. That's my only regret. I was fortunate because I came into the business 15 years ago when email fundraising was really starting to kind of catch its feet and was really starting to scale. So I was doing work on the email and digital side alongside direct mail list brokerage, which still to this day is about 90% of what I do on a day-to-day basis. But I got to see both sides of the industry. And as a result, I got to go to shows that were oriented towards digital and email, and shows that were oriented towards direct mail, and got to see how the differences, but more importantly, the overlaps there in concepts and principles and techniques. And, one of the examples is, speaking with a human voice and having an authentic voice, something that's really a big part of what makes email fundraising successful, is sounding like it's coming from an actual person. I mean, these are principles that go back 50 years in direct mail. It's the reason why things like stamps and handwritten fonts are effective, because it's it feels like that person-to-person communication. So I saw a lot of overlap there. But what I also noticed was it was unique speakers, unique companies working in these spaces, and for the most part, completely unique attendees. So I had started having conversations on the sidelines with friends and colleagues about ways that direct mail and digital fundraising could not just operate as competitors in these different silos, but how they can actually complement and make each other stronger by working together, and the benefits of integration. And I guess around 5 years ago, I kind of reached admittedly a point of frustration where I was having these conversations on the sidelines, and I knew that I was on the right track because I kept finding people who agreed with what I was having to say. But then you would see speakers that weren't talking a lot about integration, and you weren't hearing these ideas on stage. And I just kind of channeled that into originally starting to post more on LinkedIn. And that was something that was inspired by people like Jeremy, and Anthony Jones is another person who I follow, who does an amazing job at LinkedIn personal branding. And I saw what some others were doing, and I just started writing on a regular basis about these concepts. I unofficially branded it unsiloed fundraising, and talking about how different fundraising channels could work together and make each other stronger in the process, and the benefits of that. And just started to get traction. I would run into people at conferences. They would say that, oh, I always read your content online, and maybe people that never even liked or commented back. And then I realized that people were seeing it, and was starting to generate some conversation around these ideas. And then around 3 years ago, the next step of that was starting the podcast. And that originally started as kind of a show for me to talk about some advice and tips around these concepts. And then that evolved into also doing interviews and some other content as well. And that's just been a blast, being able to connect with new people in the industry who I otherwise wouldn't have met. So it was really unintentional. It was super organic. And what I've tried to do now that I have been fortunate enough to kind of get some traction and speaking appearances and appear on panels and really kind of advance my own thought leadership is to encourage others to take the plunge as well. The hardest part is hitting record, hitting post, starting that first podcast. It's terrifying to put yourself out there for the reason most of us are afraid of public speaking. It's that vulnerability and that fear of judgment. And I just try to tell others it is so worth it because the people who are going to appreciate what you're doing greatly outnumber any of the critics. And if you commit to it, you will find an audience and you will get your ideas out there and it will pay off. So I wish that I had started it sooner, but I've kind of taken my journey here and my story and now trying to encourage other fundraisers and other aspiring thought leaders to do the same thing.
Yeah. So the podcast, fun fact, you may not be aware of this, but you and my friend Shannon McCracken kept me company on our dog walk yesterday in the middle of the day. So that was Shannon and I go way back to Special Olympics days. So with the podcasts, it seems like a lot of people have podcasts. So why do you think podcasts are exploding? Like I literally feel like everyone from like Snoop Dogg to Dax Shepard to everyone seems to have a podcast these days. Why are they exploding? And then can you take us like, so if somebody wants to have a podcast, like how do you get started with something like that?
I think they're exploding because the discovery process is starting to scale and more people are just getting into them. But part of it is for the reason that you just mentioned, that audio is really the only media stream that you can passively consume. I do the same thing. I listen to it while I'm walking the dog, while mowing the lawn. I do it when I'm shoveling the driveway during the winter. I mean, you can consume content while you're doing something else, and that's a pretty magical thing that you really can't do with any other medium. But audio also allows you to have long form, nuanced conversations in a way that's hard to replicate in print or in video, like we're doing here. And it really kind of allows you to not just talk about top level or superficial themes, but really get into thought process and have conversations. And one of the things that I didn't know when I started a podcast, but that I quickly discovered is that fundraisers enjoy listening to conversations about fundraising. Not everything needs to be tip oriented or action oriented. Ideally, you want your audience to get something tangible out of the experience. But people who are passionate about a subject matter enjoy listening to other people who are passionate about that subject matter. And that's something that is really unique to the audio experience. So I think it's just that more people have discovered podcasts, and it tends to kind of just be a bit of a black hole where you listen to one podcast and then you realize, oh, wow, there's podcasts on any number of topics that I'm interested in. And it really kind of sucks you in. And most people, once they dabble in podcasts, they just get deeper and deeper into it. And I think that's something that's only going to grow. I don't know the most recent numbers, but what I saw most recently is that maybe half of Americans have listened to a podcast. So there's plenty of room to grow there. It's a touchscreen push away for most people with a smartphone. So it's something that's only going to grow, and a great way to kind of have longer form, more nuanced conversations, I feel.
Yeah. And I love audiobooks because that's the only way to multitask and get through some reading, if I'm allowed to call it that. So the house party had, like, first year into pandemic seemed to have a big spike in a moment. Do you think has it fizzled out? Is it still around? I stopped going on there just because of time constraints, but is that still a thing?
I think it's the explosion of Clubhouse in the beginning of the pandemic. I think there is a house party too. It's so hard to keep up with all these new streams, but I think the explosion, it demonstrates the power of audio. There's a lot of reasons that I think Clubhouse seems to have fizzled out a little bit, but the value of, and one of the things I actually wrote about during the time was if you have a nonprofit organization, you should have a Clubhouse chat with your donors. Even if Clubhouse isn't going to be the silver bullet that's going to take your fundraising to the next level, audio is here to stay. And maybe you're not on Clubhouse 5 years from now, but you probably will have a podcast, or maybe you'll be doing audio content on LinkedIn, which I believe is quickly moving into the space, or Twitter Spaces or Facebook. The common thread there is audio, and it is fractured, and it still kind of has to sort itself out. Which of these mediums is going to be the big player in fundraising and the big player in general. I'm sure there's going to be some consolidation there, but podcasting is pretty stable just because you're not reliant on any one individual platform. You publish your content in any number of places, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, most of the recording services published to all of the major platforms. So you're not reliant on any one platform in the same way you are if you invested a ton of time into Clubhouse. But that's the common thread that I see there, is just that audio and conversations are so powerful and raw and personal in a way that other mediums are not. And I think we're just going to see more growth in the space, and fundraisers, I think, would be wise to dabble in it if they haven't already, both for their organizations and for personal branding as well.
That makes sense.
And you had asked before about getting started, Olga. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ignore that part of the question.
Say that part again.
You had asked before about getting started into podcasts, and I apologize.
No, I was actually, I think what you explained about why more people are getting into it, that makes sense. And it seems like the barrier to entry is pretty low now. You don't need a full-blown studio to get started.
It is super low. And this is the misconception about podcasting is, yes, there is a high-end experience, and you can invest lots of money into audio equipment and mics. And I mean, it really is limitless how far you can take it. But for just getting started, the barrier for entry is almost zero for most people. Honestly, I started Dynamic Nonprofits from my iPhone on my kitchen table.
Yeah.
And I started using Anchor, which is a free recording app which distributes to all of the major podcast services and allows you to edit just basic stuff. It's nothing flashy. And then over time, I upgraded and invested in a microphone and have started adding some more bells and whistles. But I always say that substance is much more important than flash for your getting started. So if you have a smartphone and you can record to that and start doing podcasts, I mean, microphones and smartphones are pretty high quality. They've come a long way over the years. And if you just start putting content out there and you're adding to the conversation, that is going to get you much further in the beginning than investing a ton of money and trying to put something together that's flashy and polished. And if you want to be the next Joe Rogan, or you want to do something on a large scale, then maybe those production values are more important. But for super niche targeted audiences, passion and knowledge and value is really what is going to get you traction.
So I think what Dan is saying, before you invest heavily and equip your basement into a full-blown studio, maybe like do a few episodes and see if you're going to stick with it. I think that's the takeaway there.
Right. Because I believe, I don't know if this is an exact number, but I think it's close. Something like 70% of podcasts have one episode and never have another one. So there's a lot of people that dabble and it doesn't get traction right away. You have to commit to it. You have to have a plan and trust the process. And if you're doing something valuable, it will gain traction, but it's definitely not the kind of thing you could do once. And if it doesn't work right off, it like most things, you have to commit to it for a little while to really gain an audience and gain the trust of that audience.
That makes sense. Before we wrap up here, one question that I wanted to ask, and that's something that I've been thinking about, the whole notion of best practices. So is it real? Is there a set of best practices, or do you feel like it's a magical unicorn where, best practices are going to completely depend on context of what you're doing, and you really kind of have to filter it through that? Just sort of the concept of, here's the way. Do you think that's real, or do you think that's something that comforts us to feel like we have a playbook we're following?
I do think best practices exist to an extent, but I'll caveat that by saying that it's a moving target. So I think we all remember when email fundraising was really kind of hitting its stride, a best practice was to have a branded template. And then over time, that has shifted towards more of a personal approach. And now you see a lot of email fundraisers that are sending emails that look like they came from your mom. They're just plain text because things have gone in the other direction. So it's always important to. I don't want to dismiss best practice advice, but I've always tried to approach things counterintuitively and say, well, if you don't see anyone else doing this, is that because it doesn't work or because nobody has tried it? And especially with fundraising, testing is so important. Having a counterintuitive mindset, trying things out of the box. I mean, I'm sure that the first person who thought about writing a plain text email. I think that the ball that really, the thing that really got the ball moving on all of this humanization of email content was the Obama presidential campaign in 2008, and they had the famous subject line that just said "Hey," and that kind of got things going from there. I mean, who came up with that idea? So it's important to think counterintuitively, and I do believe in general in marketing and fundraising that there is an advantage to being different. So something can become best practice, but then if it gets replicated enough time, you lose the attention of the audience, and then you need to find the next thing. So don't ignore best practices entirely. There probably is some value there, but also think counterintuitively. What can we do different to get attention, to get noticed? And then you may end up finding that you're building your own best practices, and then people are looking to you for advice. So definitely a moving target, especially as shortened and as fractured as our attention is these days. The same thing is not going to work for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I like that, kind of being flexible and thoughtful so that you're not so hung up on the best practices that you're not thinking outside the box. You're sort of paralyzed by, well, how is everyone else doing it? And I imagine subject line, "Hey," will not perform the same way right now as it did a few years back, but maybe it would. I don't know. Worth trying.
Right. Exactly. And the other thing I would add to that is fundraising in particular is so unique that different types of organizations that are looking for different types of donors are going to have their own best practices. So, if you're looking for higher end donors, your best practice is going to be very different than somebody who's looking to mass market and is looking to build up a file of $15 and $20 donors that they want to engage with and get those donors to pay for themselves over time. The techniques are going to be very different. The things that are effective are going to be very different. And the things that are going to get you the most value out of those higher end donors are going to be very different than donors who are giving at the lower end level. So best practices kind of becomes this blanket terminology, but really the industry is so fractured and so specific to individual types of mailers and goals right now that it's important to keep that in mind when you're reading a best practice article online. Is who is this really targeted towards, and is it speaking towards the type of organizations and missions and objectives that our clients are working for?
So pay attention and don't follow blindly. I like that.
Exactly.
I like that. Dan, you have been such a wonderful guest today. So thank you for joining me for a Friday morning chat. I really do appreciate it. Maybe come back and visit me again.
I'll come back and visit anytime. This has been a real thrill. I really appreciate what you're trying to do here because I love that you're calling it people of substance, because that's something that I try to do with my content, is not so much highlighting credentials and achievements, but really talking to people who are doing interesting things and have an interesting thought process. So that's the kind of thing that that really fascinates me, that I try to highlight as well. So I appreciate that you're doing something like that here. And I wish you the best of luck. It's been an honor to be here, and I'd be happy to come back anytime. And hopefully next time Kona will be here and can make an appearance as well.
That would be great. I think a lot of people would appreciate it. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Olga. Have a great day.